Welcome to Readings in the Khalidiyya. My name is Brinkley Messick. I'm a professor in the departments of anthropology and Misas, which is Middle Eastern, South Asian, and African Studies. And I'm a founding faculty member in the Center for Palestine Studies at Columbia. Located in Jerusalem, the AlAzhar Library is one of the most important manuscript collections in Palestine and one of the most significant family-owned Islamic manuscript collections in the world. The library's collection was recently digitized and made available to scholars by the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library, HMML. This accessibility of the collection to users around the world is opening new avenues for the study of the history and the intellectual life of Palestine and the wider region. Readings in the Khalidiyya is a project of the Center for Palestine Studies, which is now in its 11th year. If you'd like to know what CPS has been up to over these years, please see our 10-year report on our website under Resources. Readings is also co-sponsored by the Columbia's Center for the Study of Muslim Societies, or CSMS. CPS has additionally been supported in this project by talented librarians, Kokab Chavarro and Peter Majerski at Columbia, and Guy Burak at NYU. The Readings Project focuses on the newly accessible Khalidi collection through conversations with scholars involved in manuscript studies. Recordings of previous sessions are available on the CPS website under Programming Jerusalem. For information about the Khalidi Library itself, you can visit the library's excellent website. And as for the digitized text, these are to be found on the Hill Museum and Manuscripts Library's website. Today's session represents the start of the second academic year of our Readings Project. Our launch occurred last fall in October, and it was nice that our colleague Rashid Khalidi, who's a family member of the Khalidi family that has this library, he's our Edward Said professor in the history department, and he was also a member of CPS, for example, but he was able to moderate that first session. But today he has a teaching schedule that doesn't permit him to join us. We welcome back Ahmed al-Shamsi, who participated in an earlier reading session in February of this year, that is in the last academic year. Ahmed al-Shamsi is an associate professor at the University of Chicago. He studies the intellectual history of Islam, focusing on the evolution of the classical Islamic disciplines and scholarly culture within their broader historical contexts. His research addresses themes such as orality and literacy, the history of the book, and the theory and practice of Islamic law. Al-Shamsi's first book, The Canonization of Islamic Law, A Social and Intellectual History, traces the transformation of Islamic law from a primarily oral tradition to a systematic written discipline in the 8th and 9th centuries. His second book, Rediscovering the Islamic Classics, How Editors and Print Culture Transformed an Intellectual Tradition, he shows in this work how Arab editors and intellectuals in the 19th and early 20th centuries used the newly adopted medium of printing to rescue classical Arabic texts from oblivion and to popularize them as classics of Islamic thought. It's clear that this second work is very close to the project of the Khalidiyya. Other recent research projects by Ahmed al-Shamsi investigate the interplay of Islam with other religious and philosophical traditions. For example, by exploring the influence of the Greek sage Galen on Islamic thought and the construction of a distinct self-identity among early Muslims. Ahmed al-Shamsi's title today is Excavations in the Scrap Paper Basket, which focuses on the activities and attitudes of an individual named Tahir AlJazeera. To respond to Ahmed's remarks today, we are pleased to welcome Torsten Wollina, who is research associate at the State Library in Berlin. He received his PhD from the Free University in Berlin and his MA degree from the University of Jena. He has worked at the Orient Institute Beirut, Hamburg University, and has received a Marie Curie co-fund fellowship from Trinity College in Dublin. He's currently working on a Natural Research Council, DFG, funded project, Orient Digital, in the State Library in Berlin. Torsten's research focuses on questions of provenance, especially the translocations of Damascene manuscripts in the 19th and 20th century. Another research interest is in how intellectual and social history affect each other in textual production, as in the writing of contemporary history. Some of his research can be followed on his blog, Damascus Anecdotes. So we will have a discussion by Ahmed al-Shamsi, and then we'll have a comment or reflections and maybe questions from Torsten. And then we'll open the proceedings up to your questions. And to make questions, of course, is to use the Q&A function on the menu below the screen. And we will try to address these questions as much as we can, as many as we can. And we will probably conclude the proceedings by about 2:15. So Ahmed, please.
Thank you very much, Brink, for your introduction. Thank you, Torsten, for agreeing to join, and thank you to the Center for Palestine Studies and the Khalidiyya Library for facilitating this. I think this is a wonderful program. It's a wonderful program of kind of, the Khalidiyya Library is a is a wonderful institution. I've been to Jerusalem. When I went there the last time, I wasn't interested in manuscripts, unfortunately, so I haven't visited it. But I've spent quite a bit of time now in the digital holdings, and have become quite enamored with it. And this program of slowly enlightening us about this library through this series of lectures, I think is really wonderful, and is a really wonderful way of giving these collections their due. So what I would like to do is first of all share my screen with you to show you some pictures. So the person I'm going to talk about today, or in the second part of my presentation, Tahir AlJazeera, you see the picture here. In the very end of the first catalog of the Khalidiyya Library, the last 2 pages, you find this this addendum, this mulhaq, in which a number of works are listed that Tahir AlJazeera reconstructed from what is called here the dasht, which is an interesting word that I want to go into some detail here in the first part of my presentation to explain what a dasht exactly is, and from the title of my talk about scrap paper, that is what I want to investigate. So Tahir AlJazeera spent time in the Khalidiyya Library, in what Konrad Hirschler, when he spoke here earlier in this series called the messy corner of the Khalidiyya Library, to extract these works from the loose pages, the unbound loose material that exists in the library. And what I want to start with today is, first of all, introduce you to the scrap paper corner of Arabic manuscript libraries in general, how the term developed, how different terms that refer to this developed in Arabic, and then turn towards the Khalidiyya and Tahir AlJazeera's work in particular. So these are here what I call the 2 faces of an Arabic manuscript library. What you normally, like when you have the good luck of actually being led to the actual books rather than microfilm or digital images, you will generally see here what you see on the right hand side. You will see bound codices that look more or less like books, like printed books from the outside. They look a little bit older. I mean, these ones here look a little bit tattered. There are even nicer ones you can encounter. But there is a part of the library that is that you normally don't get to see. You don't get to see at first the first time you visit, maybe you get to see it once you become friends with a librarian, which is here on the left-hand side, the place where the loose pages are stored. This is the place where, in a sense, the most fragile elements are stored. These pages very often are the oldest. Very often they have a lot of holes. They are only fragmentary. They're about to disintegrate. And librarians, as they are, normally don't want ordinary people just to rummage around in these places. Now, particularly in the work of Konrad Hirschler, I became aware of already pre-modern Muslim libraries and librarians having terms for this place. And so what he documents in the Ashrafiyya library catalog is that the normal term there is makharim. So these are the kind of incomplete codices or incomplete works that are not fully bound anymore. So that is the one data point I have about the pre-modern period. In the modern period, you see a continuation of that classical term in Morocco, where they still primarily refer to khurum. That is the term that they have in libraries, in library catalogs, etc. This is the place where unbound single pages are kept. While in the Mashriq, I mean, in fact, like from Algeria onwards, but particularly Egypt, Syria, Sham, Palestine, and Iraq, etc., the term dasht has become the norm, and this here is the tweet as evidence. On the right-hand side, you have a Moroccan scholar tweeting about an individual page of a Quran that he has found, that he is displaying here, and then down there a Kuwaiti Nawal al-Khayyat asking, what do you mean when you say khurum? Do you mean dasht? And unfortunately, I mean, she asked that question 3 years ago. He never responded. If she's watching, yes, the answer is yes. Khurum and dasht. That is, these are the two similar terms. In fact, I mean, what is interesting is that in the Mashriq, kharm and khurum are terms that are used in philology and textual studies to refer to lacunae, i.e. to blank spaces in the text that are either left blank by the copyist or holes in it through worms or water damage. So now that we have the terminology down, what about the history of it? What does dasht mean? In the classical dictionaries, you find the word dasht, but there simply it means desert. That's coming from Persian. But starting in the mid 19th century, Boutros al-Bastani's lexicon Muhit al-Muhit, he at the beginning has the normal entry. Dasht means desert. But then towards the end, he says that it is also colloquially used to refer to things that are abandoned. And then on the right-hand side, really the first proper kind of usage here is by Ahmed Taimur. Of course, Torsten has studied him. Late 19th, early 20th century manuscript collector, bibliophile, really important person. In his, he's written a lexicon on Egyptian colloquial, and in it he has an entry on dasht. He says it's a technical term for mixed up and jumbled papers. And what is really interesting, what helped me a lot to understand it, is he traces it back to the early 19th century Egyptian historian al-Jabarti's use. And that's where I want to take you next. This is from the very introduction of al-Jabarti's work that I in fact cited in my most recent books, in which he gives you a kind of bibliography of the great Arabic works of history, and then ends with a kind of depressing conclusion, saying that these works, I know their names, but you actually, you can't find these works anymore, except as ajza mudashata, as kind of scattered, loose fragments, right? So if you imagine, he walks into a preprint Cairene library, there are the bound books on the shelves. They do not contain, they are not anymore these classical histories. He cannot find them there anymore. However, he can find some individual pages that are from these books. So he doesn't have the work in front, the complete works of these classics in front of him anymore, but he is aware of fragments, right? Mudashata. So this is from the same root as dashed. Now, what I found particularly interesting as well is that the word dashed also comes up in non-library contexts, but they are applied to archival practices anyway. So here, this is from a report that the Egyptian Grand Mufti Muhammad Abdu famously wrote on the Sharia courts, on the improvement and the reform of the Sharia courts. And what he complains about here is that many documents in the Sharia courts are not properly filed, so they end up in a dashed. So here the idea is, if you have a library where the books disintegrate, where the bindings fail, the library ends up with these loose pages that are put in a kind of scrap paper pile, while in these judicial practices, you have, in a sense, the opposite. You have individual documents that are generated, and they're meant to be filed properly in the proper date and the proper whatever in the proper area. But if that does not happen, you just throw them into a box, whatever, where they stay, and where they are much less accessible for later consultation. And so this usage of dashed is maintained in at least in the Egyptian National Archives, where dashed, very often translated as miscellaneous papers, exists as a category for each of the major parts of the National Archives. Now, where can you find dashts apart from libraries and other government institutions? We have here an example of a book dealer or a warraq maintaining a dasht. So this is Muhibbuddin al-Khatib, in fact, a protege of Tahir al-Jaza'iri, who goes to the Hijaz during World War I to support the Arab uprising against the Ottomans. And while he does this, he goes to a bookseller. And in his dasht, he discovers a large fragment of Abu Ala al-Ma'arri's work that is otherwise not attested. I mean, this is the only fragment that we have of this work. He brings it back with him, and he sells it to Ahmed Taimur. It stays in Ahmed Taimur's collection, and then in 1938, Mahmoud Zanati edits it. So this is an example of a bookseller maintaining this loose page collection, and I'm going to come back to what the function of this might be a little bit later on. So here we have the question is what happens to material that is in the dasht in a library, and obviously the ideal would be that the way it is in modern libraries today, a book gets damaged, it gets put somewhere where it can't be harmed by use anymore, and then it gets rebound. By the nature of this, it's difficult to find instances where something ended up in the dasht, stayed there for a while, and then was reconstituted in the pre-modern period. But there are other things that can happen to something in the dasht. I mean, the other obvious thing that can happen is that they stay there, and I guess the longer pages stay in a dasht, the less likely it becomes that they get taken out again. They become jumbled up with the other material in that place, and of course they are subject to deterioration, damaged by humidity, by insects, etc. Another possibility is that they are sold to a warraq. I call that a book dealer, but of course in the pre-modern period, a warraq was also a book producer. And one of the main things that a warraq does is he makes bindings, and for a binding you need pasteboards, and the way you make pasteboards is that you glue together pages, right? As you can see here on these pictures, if you take apart pre-modern Arabic bindings, you find pages of Arabic writing, and sometimes you discover things that are otherwise lost. Here in Chicago, for example, we have a whole collection of bindings, of book bindings that are yielding finds of other manuscripts. So that is a possibility, that you have these booksellers buying loose pages from libraries. The second one is even less ideal, I would say, as a bibliophile, is that these pages are being sold as wrapping material. The first time I really came across this was reading an obituary to a German Orientalist called Fleischer, Helmut Leberecht Fleischer, who apparently in his hometown in Eastern Germany went to buy cheese at a market stall, and the cheese merchant had wrapping, like paper, used paper to wrap the cheese in, and there were pages of an Arabic dictionary, of an Arabic grammar. So this was early 19th century. This was not printed material. This must have been manuscripts that Fleischer then examined and became interested in Arabic. There's a second example here that is from the writing of Jurji Zaidan, published it in the early 19th century and early 20th century, but it is about the mid 19th century, where he tells the story of these. He calls them al-kutub al-mafkuka, but he adds in parentheses dashed, that were sold by caretakers of mosques to fruit sellers and to greengrocers to wrap their wares in it. So that's the kind of that is one of the outlets in where this material from the dasht can go if things don't go well. Now, when we turn towards when we start to approach the founding of the Khalidiyya library towards the late 19th century, we find a lot of accounts in the literature about the ubiquity of these loose page, these scrap paper phenomena in Arabic manuscript libraries. In a sense, the most dramatic one is here from the Mosque of Qayrawan by Muhammad Bayram, who published that in Al-Muqtataf, where he describes visiting this library and finding basically that the entire collection just consists of loose papers that are tied up in bundles with string, and that contain paper, but also parchments that are kind of willy-nilly just stored, becoming dusted over and having spider webs around them. So this is partly a problem, of course, of these institutions of libraries, and partly a reason why you find from the mid 19th century a kind of reform movement of Arabic libraries, that you have these endowed libraries, these from going back centuries, that are being centralized in national libraries, or in kind of modern libraries that have a modern way of doing things, that have well-paid librarians, that have catalogues, etc. And so we can find in the very accounts of the foundation of these libraries accounts of this. So here, the Egyptian National Library, Khizana al-Khidawiyya, today called Dar al-Kutub, in Cairo, that brings together all these endowed libraries. And each of these endowed libraries have these loose paper holdings that are then included in the Dar al-Kutub, and from which then these books are reconstructed. So these are two examples, two hadith works, where you have on the first pages written mustakhraj min dasht al-mu'ayyad here on the left-hand side. So mustakhraj, I mean, extracted, or I would translate it more loosely, reconstructed from the dasht of the Mu'ayyad Mosque in Cairo, and added to the collection of the Dar al-Kutub in 1893, I think, if I read this correctly. And then on the right-hand side, the same thing, mustakhraj min ad-dasht fi Yanair 86, min madrasat Sargat Mish. So this is a madrasa in Cairo. So we have here two works that were reconstructed over decades. So 86, and the library was founded in 1870. One was added as a bound, reconstructed and added as a bound volume in 1886, one 1893. So once it took 16 years, once 23 years. So you imagine there are librarians behind the scenes working on these loose leaf collections, reconstructing these works and then adding them to the library, which is interesting for us to also understand the development of these libraries, because very often these libraries expand. So they expand, of course, because they buy more books and they catalog their stuff better, but also because they make new books from that scrap paper cache that they have in their collections. And finally here, the AlAzhar Library, again, founded 1897. Before that, the AlAzhar had various smaller libraries that are then put together, and they also had some of their books in mosques surrounding AlAzhar. And so here, this article from al-Muqtataf tells of the dasht of the Al-Aini Mosque near Al-Azhar, containing so many loose pages that one of the Azhar shuyukh decided to just burn the whole stuff because it's such a mess and dirty and whatever, only to be prevented from doing this. And then on the left-hand side, describing of how these librarians kind of patiently reconstruct these works, look through these individual pages and find complete works or at least fragments that are then becoming part of this collection. Now, turning towards the Khalidiyya, Tahir AlJazeera is the man who began this process of reconstructing these works in the Khalidiyya. Tahir AlJazeera from an Algerian family that fled the French occupation of Algeria with Amir Abd al-Qadir, settled in Damascus, and became both a scholar and a bibliophile and a really important activist in the founding of libraries in Damascus, in Aleppo, in Jerusalem. And he sold many of his manuscripts to Ahmed Taimur, Ahmed Zaki, to the Egyptian National Library. So a very important figure. And one of the really important things he did was that he kept notebooks. And you can see one page on the right-hand side, about 100 notebooks that are now in the Zahiriya library. Many of them, not all of them, but many of them, like several volumes, have been published, even with different titles. But what I found is that volume 32 of his notebooks has the title that it was written in Jerusalem and the date of the 20th of Rabi al-Awwal 1320, which is 1902. So this is the time in which he spends in Jerusalem, and he works on manuscripts in Jerusalem. And what we find in it is several entries that explicitly deal with manuscripts in the Khalidiyya. He never says this explicitly, but one can find this, and I think I'm the first one to point out this. So that's bear with me here. I'm excited about showing you this. So this is he has one entry on this manuscript he found interesting. So all of these entries in his notebooks are just excerpts or things he read, interesting things he read. So this entry here says, this is an entry on a copy of the Maqamat of al-Hariri, and it says that that copy is copied from a copy that was copied from the autograph. Right, so there's that is important. It's important because that indicates that it's not an autograph, it's not a copy from the autograph, but it's a third generation, and that at least the copyists were aware of this, and that this might be a particularly reliable copy to use. And this, on the right hand side, the MS-77 from the Khalidiyya library is in fact the copy he's talking about. If you look at the left hand corner, that's what it says, right? Exactly what he says here about this. So it says at the beginning of this manuscript that this is a copy of the autograph. The second thing that he found interesting about this copy is the waqfiyya, so the endowment record at the beginning, which is a waqfiyya for a madrasa in Sivas in central Anatolia. So this is an interesting historical tidbit about the kind of, so we can see it's not just 21st century people who work on Arabic manuscripts who are interested in this, on these kind of marginal notes and manuscripts and the information that it can give us about history of text, etc. But somebody like Tahir AlJazeera was also interested in that. Now, what is interesting about this particular copy is that you can compare it to another copy that was reconstructed from the Dasht. And this other copy was not reconstructed by Tahir AlJazeera, but years earlier by Hussein Husni al-Khalidi. This is a manuscript that Konrad Hirschler showed in his talk on the right-hand side. Again, this also says at the beginning that it was reconstructed from the Dasht. But the difference between these two manuscripts, to me, shows very much the different approach that al-Jaza'iri took to these works. So why would you want to reconstruct this maqamat work on the right-hand side? Well, first of all, it's very pretty. Right? It has this beautiful gold-colored and blue centerpiece, and it is, the calligraphy is beautiful. It has an interesting commentary on the maqamat. So it is both aesthetically beautiful, and in terms of content, it's an interesting, it explains this work. However, historically speaking, it's not that interesting. It's a 16th century copy, and certainly not the most precise rendering of the Maqamat al-Hariri, while the text that Tahir AlJazeera was interested in, much more plain, but much earlier. This is probably 14th century copy. It's only a fragment, but there is, what you can see in this approach is that the Tahir AlJazeera was interested in the oldest copies. He was not interested in the prettiest. He was interested in the one that is closest to the autograph copy, partly because he was interested in printing these things, right? He wanted to print the most accurate versions of these works. So here we have one example of his particular philological interests in focusing on specific copies of the same work. The second example I wanted to give, I promise to wrap it up shortly, is two copies of al-Jawharis Sihah, which is a very important work on Arabic lexicography. Still, I mean, well, maybe not anymore, but at least until the 20th century, like the standard one-volume Arabic dictionary. And he mentions again here in this entry in his notebook two early copies of the Sihah, and there are excerpts I put on the right hand side. This is MS 228 and MS 81. You can see actually they are pretty damaged through worms, and the upper one is, as he says here in his entry, is a Maghribi script, and the second one is was copied in 554, and it also says that it has a lot of harakat, right? It has a lot of the vocalizations, which is so both of these are early copies, and especially the second one is very rich in vocalizations, which is important. If you know, like Arabic dictionary that doesn't have vocalizations, pretty useless. You know, that's the one of the major reasons you go to one of those dictionaries is to know, is it khurm or kharm, right? Like what I showed earlier. This is a discussion about it. So he has a practical sense. He has a philological and textual critical sense in what he's particularly interested in. As a side note on this is that this copy, the MS-81, is copied by an interesting copyist, this Sa'id ibn Abil Badr Yuhanna ibn Abd al-Masih, who says at the first page, كتبه لنفسه, right? It's kind of an interesting way of saying it. You know, I'm not copying it for money or whatever. This is for my own purpose, for my own usage. I'm copying this work, and I found it so interesting that I did some research in it, and we actually have other manuscripts of his that have survived. He copied this Christian universal history that is now kept in Florence, in which he exactly says the same thing at the beginning. كتب لنفسه. So here, that might be an interesting entry point of research to see, you know, where can we find more manuscripts of this copyist and how they spread around the world. Finally, to end with, this is the oldest so far found manuscript in the Khalidiyya library. Again, it was reconstructed by al-Jaza'iri. It is a fragment of Ibn Durayd's al-Akhbar al-Manthura. As you can see, this is really, I mean, you know, I haven't seen obviously this manuscript itself, but you can see how thin it is, right? You can imagine like these pages, how easily they would fall to pieces if you hold them wrong. But this is a very early manuscript. We don't exactly know how early it is. In the catalog, it's estimated that it could be from the 10th century. That would be possibly even in the lifetime of Ibn Durayd. So this is definitely an early script. We have, I think it's about 50 folios of it, and otherwise it is not found, seemingly not attested anywhere else in the world. So this is the kind of work that he did, the kind of excavations, right? This is not, he didn't go into a library and look on the bookshelves. He excavated these things from this dasht. And at the end, the cataloger of this early catalog, this 1900 catalog, says that that the dasht has not been exhausted. There is more in this, but it takes so much time to look for works in there. So my conclusion is here, what I want you to go away with is that the dasht is a strange in-between state for written materials. It's a place where if you're lucky as a piece of paper, at some point you're going to be rediscovered and reconstituted into a book. If you're unlucky, you either stay there or you know, you become maybe a binding, or you kind of end up somewhere else, burned, or as wrapping some bananas somewhere. Secondly, the dasht is one of the prime places where new works are to be found, and at the same time, it is also one of the most difficult to access. And what struck me is that very often in digitization efforts, the dasht is actually not digitized. I mean, there's reasons for it, obviously, and it's much more difficult. You know, how do you do this, right? I mean, if you digitize a book, then you can have a specific place for a book. If you want to digitize a dasht, what you just have individual images just thrown somewhere. So there is kind of technological challenges ahead that people have to think about, how to you know, enter this digital age without erasing this amazing storehouse for further discoveries. Finally, just to show how continuously relevant the dashed is. This is an announcement from 2 years ago, where a new manuscript from the Almohad period, Muslim Spain, was discovered in the Qarawin mosque in Fez. Again, you can see, if you look at this, these are individual pages, pagelets, but either an entire or almost entire diwan of 6th, 12th century poetry was discovered at this point. So thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to your questions and comments.
Thank you, Ahmed. Thank you very much. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions. Torsten, please.
Yes, I also want to thank you, Ahmed. That was exciting. Like, it was a tour de force through the dashed, diving in and coming out again. I mean, the dashed seems to be, to me, like one of those end and starting points for, like, until when you can reconstruct where a manuscript had come from, or that it has come from that point, like from that source to other points. One thing that I found really interesting is, in that regard, that, like, usually, you couldn't reconstruct, like, smaller texts, at least, or lesser known texts in their entirety and with their history, if basically the front pages are lacking, right? Mostly when you have, like, on the front pages, you have notes on ownership, on endowment, and other forms of, like, where those manuscripts had moved. So it strikes me that, like, in the examples that you presented to us, the ones that were reconstructed, they often have that front page, or at least, the title page, which lets us know what the work is, like in the examples from the National Library in Egypt, but also from the examples that you showed us from the Khalidiyya. And I think that begs the questions, how those, like, whether those manuscripts were already entering the Khalidiyya in their entirety, and then it was a lack of resources devoted to those manuscripts, so that they ended up in a dashed, maybe as a temporary solution. And then they came out of the dashed again in the last 100 and something years. And in that regard, I wondered, I really agree with you, like, emphasizing the role that librarians, not researchers as such, but librarians play in these discoveries and in these excavations, as you call them. I would like to ask you, do you want to make a distinction between, like, these modern librarians that you cast as mostly as excavators and as discoverers, and maybe more like earlier librarians that kind of have a certain influence on books ending up in that dashed?
So please, you want to answer a few questions?
Yeah. So I mean, to first answer the first question. Not, I mean, not principally, as in, I don't think there was, like, in the pre-modern period, librarians just weren't proper librarians or didn't have these interests. One of my students, Carl Winterstoner, is working on the kind of Mamluk era Mahmudiyya library, and their librarians were very similar. I mean, I think to our understanding of what a librarian does, their concerns, etc. But part of the problems and part of the kind of complaints that one finds in 19th century accounts of this work is that that these endowments are collapsing, meaning that librarians, first of all, are not paid at all anymore, or just are paid the wages that were put down 200 years earlier, and by now are worth nothing anymore, and they have to run other businesses or sell stuff. I mean, they're selling manuscripts, or they're selling the stuff that lies around in the dust, whatever. So I think it's part and parcel of the fact that these, I mean, one of the justifications for destroying these endowments, right? This is a legal problem, that there are these endowed libraries, and now people kind of go in there with force and taking these manuscripts and bringing them in these national libraries, is that their original stated raison d'etre is not met anymore, because they're not open anymore. They don't have librarians anymore. So therefore we can do this. And so there is this sense of, in my opinion, particularly in the Arab provinces, that the endowment system is in crisis, and therefore they also don't have good librarians anymore. And then when these new libraries are founded, they actually hire librarians. They pay them a living wage, and so they can then actually have concerns about actual not just preserving books, but even reconstructing books. So the second thing, you asked about the dust. Here I have I think I have evidence here. You can see this. This is Al-Hajj Sun'Allah al-Khalidi makes this work a waqf in 1200 of the Hijrah. So this I don't think he makes this page a waqf. I think there is a book. So this is from a work that Tahir AlJazeera reconstructed from the dust. So I think this evidence would show that in that 120 years earlier, this was a full copy, and that for some reason by the year 1320 had ceased to be. That's one piece of evidence. I have to see to find more evidence. I also had a quick look at the Q&A. Thank you so much for Boris Liebrenz. His kind of secret knowledge that he is willing to share with us, that Fleischer's the pages that Fleischer saw were actually from a printed European grammar. That's I very much appreciate this. But I mean, still, I mean, it's something to keep in mind, that used pages were used for things. I mean, another thing from the mid-19th century onwards, you have the development of cigarettes, right? Rolled cigarettes, not something before you'd find earlier. That also needed paper. So you have these used paper sellers in Cairo who buy up used papers for that. And again, that's there is a market there. Boris Liebrenz gave a talk recently about merchant letters that a German traveler bought from a warraq. So there seems to be people selling used paper to these book sellers, book producers, for purposes like making bindings. So there's a whole economy. I think that we further need to excavate, but that's relevant.
And I think there's also in the time that you're working on, there is a certain drive towards reconstructing, like basically getting back the works from books that have been that are not do not exist in their entirety anymore. I know cases from Isa Iskandar al-Ma'luf. Then there is the case of Ibn Budayar's Chronicle of Damascus, which was, according to one account, found as wrapping paper by its editor, by its original editor. And I think that at this moment there is a demand, like there has been a demand for used paper for other functions, but also there is a certain demand for used paper in order to find that you know, that rare work that could be contained in them.
So do you want to look more into the chat? I have some very super minor things I would like to just mention. I was sort of stunned actually when I saw your opening slide on books in the library, and because they were vertical on the shelf. I always thought that another kind of library mode was to have them horizontal on the shelf. And I was always told that was the kind of way of an old library. And maybe even the vertical arrangement has to do with some of the papers falling out in more readily than they would if they were horizontal. That's just you know, I look at my own shelf and there's stuff that's starting to come apart a little bit, books that are on the vertical. But I mean, is there any notion of materiality in the handling of the books and the placing of them in the library?
I mean, that's a question that's, you see, I said at the beginning, I've never visited the Khalidiyya library, so I don't know, you know, I only see, I mean, that's the distortions of the media, right? So the first time I read manuscripts were as microfilms, and then the second time was as digital images, and then it was the Alexandria library the first time where, you know, they have this glass wall and behind it the books are on shelves, and I didn't realize it's the manuscripts, and so I order these manuscripts and they bring me these volumes, and I didn't even know, I didn't even recognize that is what I'm going to look at, because I don't know, I had this two-dimensional view of them, and I didn't know about them, you know, I wasn't aware of the materiality of it. So I don't know what the history of bookkeeping in the Khalidiyya is, you know, whether maybe we can reconstruct this through images. I haven't looked through. I mean, you know, on the website there are early images. I haven't looked at it from that perspective, but of course, the classical images from the maqamat, right? The illustrated maqamat is the fact that it's, you know, on top of each other. But I don't know whether we have really data across time and space to really see whether this was a universal phenomenon.
So apparently there's a question from Conrad.
Oh yeah, so one question that Conrad asked was whether what Tahir AlJazeera mentions there, whether this is something that he found in the manuscript or whether that is something that Tahir AlJazeera in fact added to it. And I can say with a high degree of certainty that this is not Tahir AlJazeera's handwriting. He has, I'm just making this a bit bigger to share with you in a moment. I have some, let me screen share this here again. This is here on the Hill Manuscript Library website. Let's make this bigger. This is certainly not Tahir AlJazeera. This is an older hand as well. Yeah, that's as much as I can say. Is that the same as the copyist? I don't know why it went away now, but it could be same ink color, I think, maybe a thinner pen. But yeah, it's certainly not Tahir AlJazeera's judgment.
The other trivial point I wanted to to just put on the table is the notion of spider webs, because that's exactly what Imam Yahya in Yemen, in creating a new Mutawakkiliyya library, he said that's the opening sentence basically is the spiders have gone on these manuscripts. And so we need to have them cared for and organized and cataloged and all those kind of things. But it was the spiders that were the tip off for danger. Anyway, I don't mean to say that there's some. So let's see what else we have in the way of questions. So Raja Khalidi, who is the administrator of the family member in the Khalidi library, says all our books are shelved vertically and manuscripts are stored in appropriately sized acid-free boxes. So, okay, so regular modern books are vertical. That makes sense. That's in any library these days. But the manuscripts are treated differently. They're in boxes, so they're probably lying on their sides. You know, probably we could maybe see one of these boxes someday and see how it's done.
But there's also, I mean, I have not found any kind of dashed material digitized on the Hill website, and so what Raja Khalidi says seems to suggest that the dash in fact has not been digitized. So that's something important to keep in mind. And there is different, I looked at the Zahiriya library manuscript library catalog, and there is, you know, until the late 60s, there are books that are coming into the collection that come from oh yeah, okay, so Josh Magla says that they don't have any dash material digitized. From the 1960s until the late 1960s, that books come into the library that we reconstructed from the dash, and there's actually interesting material that I found and then lost again. That's why I didn't present on it, on the Zahiriya dash being housed in a room, and then the door gets blocked because the manuscripts, because the stuff collapses and they have to come through the window. So I mean, it's like a big, it's a large dashed material in the Zahiriya, and that's you know, a process that at least for a century added books from the Zahiriya. But what is, I mean, one of the main takeaways from this talk, hopefully, is that, you know, digitization gives us the idea that everything is accessible, but actually some of the most important stuff might still not be accessible. Right? And so I read a report about digitization project in Morocco where they said, we are digitizing all the manuscripts in this place, except the dashed, except the khurum for each of those, right? It's like, okay, interesting, but you know, that might actually be the real, like, you know, maybe people say, oh, I won't spend that time going to Morocco because, you know, you can, you know, read it on the internet, but you know, some of the most interesting stuff might actually not be there.
Could you address what you mean by reconstruct when you have a single page? How does that happen? Yeah.
So there's, I mean, in terms of secondary scholarship on Dash, there's one Arabic article that I've found, and that is not so much about the history of Dash, but it's about, you know, what you actually do, and part of it is, you know, these, I mean, reconstruction that can be for a whole book, right? There's, in fact, I found an account of Mahmoud Shakir, who reconstructs the Tabaqat Fuhul al-Shu'ara, which is published, I think, in 2 thick volumes, 3rd century, the earliest history of poets that we have, and he found the whole thing as loose pages within a big box of loose pages. So it's a lot of stuff that is, you know, it obviously depends on the dashed, but I mean, you encounter individual pages, and you have to be able to place them. What is the topic? Recognize script, recognize content, and then in a kind of giant game of puzzle. I mean, like the description of what the Azharis did. I think they did this on the floor, like in a giant game of puzzle, just putting like little piles, and you know, hoping that the person who put it in the dash put more or less all the stuff together rather than you have to go through the whole thing. So it's a work intensive process. You don't know the order of the page. Like once you have the pages, what is the order of the pages? So it's research, it's time.
You can't see those. You can't see those little words put at the bottom of the left corner. That helps you.
Yes.
Yes. What are those called? They have a name, I think, but I forget what it is.
Catchwords.
Catchwords. That's right. Right. So we have a question by Boris Ibnitz. There are notes by Hussein al-Khalidi, all dated 1309, I believe, that say he reconstructed a volume from the Dasht. And these notes are on nearly 10% of the collection. With the Dasht such a major part of the library, how was access organized? It was not just a basket of loose leaves, right?
I mean, the question, I mean, the part of the problem of the term Dasht is that it's not, it could refer to a place. It could refer to kind of a mental space, right? To a classification of books that are not quite anymore bound. Maybe they're quite, they're fallen to the level of quires, right? So they're not fully books anymore, but they're still partly bound, and you have to put them together. The kind of damages you find in any library, like you open an older book, like, oh my God, this thing is already half falling apart or whatever. So there clearly, are different ways of what even reconstructing from the Dasht means, and you can, I mean, in order to judge that, ideally, obviously, you'd have the things themselves, but even you can see it a little, from the digital images, like the ones that I showed you at the end, like these are really flimsy individual pages, while I mean the one from the Hussein al-Khalidi here on the right hand side looks a little bit more, I don't know, maybe that you can see actually, I wonder whether this reconstruction is also, like you can see on that, I don't know, that it would need further study, but that's a good point to make, exactly what effort had to be made to make this a working library. You look at you think, okay, I have all these nice books, but will I actually allow people to go and pick the stuff up? Random people, right? You might have your own copies that are kind of rickety, but you're careful. But if you let other people deal with it, it needs to be much more, right? Much more in a better state. So that point of reconstruction might just be like more in the direction of termim, of kind of getting the bindings proper, or whatever. But I don't know. That's just speculation of mine.
Here's another question from Boris. Katabahu linafsi is not an idiosyncratic expression of this scribe, but a very common one of copyists. I was also thinking about the same wording, in the sense that I know a lot of people who copied, even copied from print, as a religious act. It was a kind of belief. It was kind of a discipline of writing out in their own script a text, but not for other people necessarily. It maybe was just for nifsi. Maybe it was just for that individual. It wasn't for somebody else or copying for some kind of institution. But I think that's, I mean, I wouldn't be able to pass over that little phrase very quickly.
But what is interesting here is also that copy of the Sihah, he has an entry of where he copied this work, and he copied it in Egypt, and from who he copied it. So he was part of this wasn't just like he copied a book, but within a kind of public reading exercise. So I find that interesting as well. Yeah.
There are lots of questions in the Q&A now. Let's see here. How about Conrad? As for the copy of Maqamat that al-Jaza'iri reconstructed, did he just copy the note on this manuscript being copied from a manuscript copied from an autograph, or did al-Jaza'iri in fact write this note on the manuscript? in general, do we have textual traces of al-Jaza'iri's work on the manuscripts themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I answered already the first part, which is that this is not al-Jaza'iri's handwriting on this manuscript, so it's clearly from somebody else. But a lot of, I mean, in this notebook number 32, the excerpts are very often particularly interested in manuscripts that have a lot of information of where this comes from, how it relates to the autograph copy. There's a clear interest from his perspective. But I don't think he is, from my experience, he is not somebody who felt free to annotate manuscripts himself. I have not come across in those ones his own notes. Maybe partly because he had such a bad handwriting.
Here's Raja Khalidi again. But I cannot vouch for this provenance or significance or coherence of our remaining dasht. We do have the needed combination of a librarian who knows the material, a digital photography capacity, and a manuscript conservation lab that could prepare the fragments for an eventual digitization, and subsequently, from the fragments, a cataloging and even possible reconstruction. HMML to the rescue, maybe, says he.
Yeah, and in another instance, he says an open invitation to Ahmed and other potential excavators to look at the Khalidiyya dasht. But he says, which is probably a collection of 20th century fragments rather than anything much older. So that is a lovely invitation. And I mean, this is always the question, right? What is there, and who can even figure out what is there, right? And that is part of the problem, that it like a single librarian is always limited by their own exposure to what they know and what they recognize, and so it's you know, as it is with every library, right? The library actually gains knowledge about its holding by having people use it and then saying, you know what, this is actually miscatalogued. You know, this is actually the different author. You know, it's not al-Khassaf, but it's actually it's you know, and so on and so on. So there, I think that kind of like a loop where users refine the catalog is important, but the problem with the dasht is that it's much more difficult, first of all, to access it, and that is, yeah, whether that's an issue for the Khalidiyya but it's definitely an issue for manuscript libraries in general.
Torsten, do you have something?
Not specifically to that, but I think that links quite nicely to, maybe someone from the Khalidiyya library could answer how the dasht looks, like Boris's earlier question, like the form it takes, at least today, if not back in the day of Tahir AlJazeera.
We have some comments from the Khalidiyya, from Raja Khalidi, but I haven't read them all. But here's one that's actually close to my interest. And this is from Bruno B. To what extent are these archives mentioned today engaged in getting young people, particularly of primary and secondary schools, excited about these collections and hence about learning history, reading, etc.? Realizing, of course, this would be a challenge in terms of preservation, safety of the documents, etc. This is exactly, we're doing a project, myself and Guy Burak. We're trying to do a project about Palestinian history to be read by Palestinians, in a sense, and this would be both the kinds of materials, manuscript materials, and things like court records, where students who can read the khat, the handwritten texts of either manuscripts. I mean, it's a little bit of training, but it's possible if you are an Arabic reader and writer, that to get into manuscripts is not that distant. And there could be both the library kind of texts on medicine, on tasawwuf, on fiqh, whatever. And then on the other side, you could have the records from Jerusalem, from Mahkamat al-Quds. And it's my ambition, it's our ambition, to make a project where students are introduced to reading their own history and have on both these levels. And so this is what, that was the comment that I think was just hit for me.
Yeah, and there's another comment that I found interesting about how to compare them to how to compare the material in a Dasht to things like material in a Geniza, or like Qubatul Khazna. I think that the relevance is to, and I mean that's interesting. So for example, the Ahmed Zaki library, which is now also part of the Dar al-Kutub, had a Dasht, and in it, I forgot his name. I have this book somewhere. An Egyptian who wrote the history of medicine in Egypt. He discovered these ijazat, these medical ijazat, which is basically like a teacher giving a permission to a student to become a physician. But that's really fascinating kind of documents, individual documents of that were in the Dasht of Ahmed Zaki. So clearly these were document-like things that he collected there. So really Dasht is a very, it is a scrap paper basket in the sense of you never know what you find in it, right? It's not, you can't say, oh, well, the definition of a Dasht, what is exactly what you find in it. It's just a place where you put the things that don't fit anywhere else. That's why it could actually be trash, or that's why you could find gold in it, right? That's what's interesting about it.
I have something similar to Dasht in reading Daftar's Sijilet for the courts, things like this. It's just a note, but it's just, it's not part of the register. It's just stuck in there, or one like this. Oh, I have another one here somewhere, but I don't know where it is. Anyway, but this one's a modern one, very, very recent one, but it's just stuck in the register. You're reading through the registers and maybe you're photocopying them, but then these are things that are just Dasht of a different institution. We have Raja Khalidiyya on the screen with us.
Hi. Can you hear me? Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Good. So excuse my appearance. I wasn't planning on making one, but I thought since this fascinating discussion, first, Ahmed, I want to say I've been associated with the library for 10 or 15 years now, I've heard about the Dasht so much. We always talk about it. That's always referred to. I've actually looked at it and seen it, our current Dasht, so to speak. So now I know the provenance of the term and its significance, potential significance. We've always been aware that these fragments could, with enough time and effort, be reconstituted, and possibly we would discover certain fragments of manuscripts that are otherwise not in our collection. But my understanding is that this is a collection of fragments of manuscripts that fell apart, were damaged over the 100 years, let's say, since the library was established in the early 1900s, at different points, being moved. I'm not quite sure. Nobody really knows. The important thing is at least we've kept them. At certain point, I do know that 20 years ago or so, I believe Conrad and some other people went through it to try and get an idea of what's in it. And my understanding is that they concluded that there might not be anything extremely significant, but that doesn't mean that it's not something that we have to some point deal with. So the idea of digitizing, as I mentioned, I thought it was a great idea, because the big problem with this, of course, is the handling. So at least you only handle the actual item once, and then you spend as much time as you need trying to piece these fragments together. You could probably, in fact, digitally, it would probably find correspondence between writing and between, you know, state of the manuscript that would help in that cataloging process. So, I mean, it's literally in a, I won't say in a scrap basket, but it is in a carton in the library and safe, but untouched for so many years. So, as I said, an open invitation to who'd like to come and have, and of course, eventually we have to put it on our agenda of digitization, I think. That's all I'd wanted to add. Thanks for giving me the chance to do that.
Oh, thank you. And just as a second question, you said Conrad, you mean Lawrence Conrad rather than Conrad Hirschler? Okay, good.
Yes, of course. Yeah, well, we've had now a new generation of Conrad. Yeah, a different, yeah, Larry Conrad. Yeah. So you might want to look at whatever he wrote. I believe he published some stuff on his research in the early years in the 90s. So I'm not sure about the details of that.
So Ani, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Raja.
Thanks a lot.
Your appearance didn't shock us too much. We're okay.
Cheers.
But are there any final remarks by our speakers, Ahmed or Torsten? Anything you want
I would actually be interested in Ahmed answering the question by Khalid Malas, who asked about the comparison between the dashed and other accumulations of loose papers like the Geniza or the Khazna.
Yeah, I mean, I spoke about this a little bit a moment ago, saying that the kind of the very definition of what a dashed is makes it difficult to make this comparison. I think both of them are these residual places, right? That's where the stuff goes that has no other place to go. That can't be used anymore in that can't circulate in normal usage. And so, you know, while of course primarily in these dushut we find books, like the pages of what used to be books. But you know, as I mentioned in the Ahmed Zaki dasht, that there are these individual ijazas that are basically kind of, you know, for that specific issue, really are kind of degree certificates from the, I think they were from the 16th or 17th century, for physicians. So you know, you can even find documents in that, and as I said, you know, depending on the usage, you know, if you're a warraq, it might be letters, it might be these kind of things. So that's also something you, of course, you find in a Genizas or in a Khubat al-Khazna or something like this, contracts. So in that sense, I think it would be artificial to say, oh, this is a category of archive where you find these specific kind of things. I mean, I guess in terms of distribution, you would find more literary texts than you would find in, let's say, the Cairo Geniza. But still, it's the place where written things go. It's like a barzakh, right? It's not quite death, it's not quite life. It's like in between somehow.
I was saying that's a nice note to end on. I think I was muted because of the traffic on Amsterdam Avenue. Anyway, but thank you both for very interesting work, very interesting presentations, and thanks to all those who posed questions. I'm sorry if we didn't get to all of them, but we'll be attentive to it. And I also want to thank Simone Rutkowitz, who is the CPS manager, who's taken very careful, good care of us in this program.